You handed over thousands of dollars, maybe more. You planned the trip, you packed the excitement, and somewhere in that process you clicked agree on a document most people never actually read. And here's the thing. Even if you did read it at the time, it may not be the same document anymore. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is standard cruise industry practice. And 6 major cruise lines have done exactly this recently, in ways that caught passengers completely off guard, and in some cases, cost them real money and real legal standing. We're going to go through each one, and I'm going to tell you exactly what changed, why it matters, and what you can do about it before your next voyage. Stick around for line number 5, because that one drew specific attentions from consumer protection attorneys. And the language they used is something every passenger should know how to spot. The document that controls your entire cruise experience is called the passenger contract, sometimes listed as the ticket contract or passenger cruise contract depending on the line. It governs your rights if the ship breaks down, if a shore excursion injures you, if your belongings go missing, if the itinerary changes, and critically, how and whether you can sue. Most people sign it during the online check-in process, buried under luggage tags and dining reservations, and never think about it again. But here's what the industry quietly relies on. Most cruise lines reserve the right to update that contract at any time, with or without individual passenger notification. A change to their website terms of carriage page is legally considered notice. That's the game. That's what we're dealing with. Carnival Cruise Line. Let's start here, because Carnival carries more passengers than any other cruise brand in the world, which means the scope of this affects more people than almost any other line we'll discuss. Over the past 18 months, Carnival has introduced and then strengthened an arbitration clause in their passenger contract that, in plain English, means this. If something goes wrong, you and Carnival will settle it one-on-one in private arbitration rather than in a courtroom. That alone is common in consumer contracts. But the newer language goes further. It now includes an explicit class action waiver. That means if 50 passengers all experience the same problem on the same sailing, say a severe outbreak, or a systematic billing error, or a service failure affecting an entire ship, those 50 passengers cannot band together and sue as a group. Each person has to pursue their claim individually. The practical effect of this is that it makes small to medium claims economically unviable. Think about it. If Carnival improperly charged 300 passengers an extra $75 each, a class action would make that worth fighting. Individual arbitration for $75? Almost no one will do it. Consumer rights advocates have called this design intentional, and I'd have a hard time arguing with them. What you can do: if you booked before the language was updated, and you have your original confirmation email, that email typically references the contract terms in effect at time of booking. Screenshot it, save it. If a dispute arises, that documentation becomes relevant to establishing which terms apply. Royal Caribbean has built one of the most recognizable brands in the travel industry, and their recent contract changes involve something that sounds minor until you're living it. Cancellation penalty windows. Royal Caribbean modified the timeline structure of their cancellation penalties in a way that gives them more of your money, sooner if plans change. Under older terms, a significant portion of your cruise fare was refundable, up to a more generous pre-departure window. The updated terms compress that window, meaning the point at which cancellation becomes significantly costly moved earlier in the calendar. For passengers who booked under the previous terms, there were many, this shift was not proactively communicated. It was a contract page update. You were expected to check. The problem is compounded when you factor in trip insurance. If you purchased insurance based on one set of cancellation terms, and the terms changed before your sailing, your coverage assumptions may no longer match your actual exposure. That gap can be expensive. I've spoken with travel agents who've dealt with this scenario firsthand. Passengers in a penalty window they didn't realize had changed, with insurance that doesn't cover the difference. What to do before your Royal Caribbean sailing? Log into your reservation, locate the current contract, and specifically compare the cancellation fee schedule against whatever you understood when you booked. If there's a discrepancy, document it and contact their customer service. In writing, not by phone, referencing your original booking date. Norwegian Cruise Line updated their force majeure clause, and this one requires a bit of explanation because the implications are wide-ranging. Force majeure is the legal term for extraordinary events beyond anyone's control. Hurricanes, pandemics, geopolitical crises. Every cruise contract has a force majeure clause. The question is how broadly it's written. Norwegian's revised language has been flagged by travel law attorneys as notably expansive, where older versions of these clauses typically covered specific enumerated types of events. Norwegian's updated language includes catch-all phrasing that could technically be applied to a far broader range of circumstances. What that means practically: Norwegian retains greater discretion to cancel sailings, alter itineraries, or modify services without being obligated to provide a cash refund, instead offering future cruise credits. And the updated language makes it harder for passengers to argue that their specific situation isn't covered by the clause. If you have booked Norwegian and you were counting on full cash refund rights under certain circumstances, read that section of your current contract carefully. The word "including but not limited to" is doing a lot of legal heavy lifting in that document. MSC Cruises. This is a line that's grown its North American presence rapidly in recent years, and growth sometimes brings growing pains. But what happened with MSC's liability cap on baggage deserves direct attention. MSC quietly lowered the liability limit for lost or damaged passenger property, and they did it mid-booking cycle for passengers who had already made reservations. The previous cap was already low by any reasonable standard. The revised figure is lower. Now, most experienced cruise passengers know that cruise lines have never accepted meaningful liability for lost valuables. That's why travel insurance exists, and why you shouldn't bring irreplaceable items aboard. But the issue here isn't just the number. It's the fact that passengers who had already committed financially to an MSC sailing found themselves operating under different terms than the ones they'd reviewed. And MSC's notification process? A terms of carriage update on their website. That's it. If this affects you, and you haven't yet sailed, look at your travel insurance policy specifically for baggage coverage and make sure it fills the gap the cruise line just created. Celebrity Cruises rewrote their shore excursion liability waiver, and this one caught the attention of consumer attorneys not because it was unprecedented. Waivers for excursions are standard, but because of how the new language extends the protection the cruise line claims. Celebrity's updated terms include language that significantly limits their responsibility, not just for independently contracted third-party excursion operators, which is fairly standard, but in ways that blur the line of accountability when passengers are injured during excursions booked directly through Celebrity's onboard or online system. When you book a shore excursion through the cruise line directly, there's a reasonable consumer expectation that the line has vetted that operator and accepts some level of responsibility. The new waiver language makes that expectation much harder to defend legally. A passenger injured on a Celebrity-booked excursion in, say, the Caribbean or Mediterranean may find that the cruise line's financial and legal exposure, under the new terms, is substantially reduced from what it was under the prior contract. If you're booking shore excursions through Celebrity, read the current waiver language before you book. And if an excursion involves significant physical activity or risk, verify independently that the operator carries its own liability insurance. Disney Cruise Line. I know what you're thinking. Disney? Of all the brands on this list, this one surprises people the most, and I understand why. Disney's brand is built on trust, on the idea that they've thought of everything, that you're in good hands. But consumer advocacy groups took notice when Disney updated their arbitration and dispute resolution language in a way that mirrored industry trends toward passenger unfavorable terms. The updated dispute resolution section of Disney's passenger contract now requires that arbitration be conducted under specific terms that limit discovery. That's the legal process of gathering evidence before a proceeding. Limited discovery in arbitration is common, But Disney's updated language goes further in restricting the types of claims that qualify for any form of expedited small claims resolution. What that means in plain language: if you have a dispute with Disney Cruise Line, your path to resolution just got narrower and more procedurally complex, even for relatively minor claims. For a brand that charges premium prices and markets itself on exceptional customer experience, this contractual posture is worth noting before you commit to a booking. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this, because the goal isn't to scare you off cruise travel. Cruise vacations can be genuinely wonderful, and millions of people take them every year without incident. The goal is to make sure that if something does go wrong, you're not discovering these contract terms for the first time in the middle of a dispute. There are 3 things you can do right now, whether you're actively planning a cruise or have one coming up. First, find your booking confirmation email and look for the phrase Terms of Carriage or Passenger Contract. Click that link and take a screenshot of the current document. Then compare it to any version you may have reviewed at the time of booking. Differences matter. Second, call your travel insurance provider, not the insurance offered by the cruise line, your own independent travel insurance, and have a direct conversation about how your coverage interacts with the cruise line's contract terms, specifically on cancellation, medical liability, and baggage. Third, if you're paying for a future cruise, consider using a credit card with strong consumer protection features. Credit card dispute rights under federal law sometimes provide a layer of protection that the cruise line's own contract doesn't. It's not a complete solution, but it's a meaningful backstop. The companies listed here aren't necessarily bad companies. Some of them are industry leaders with decades of guest satisfaction behind them. But a company can be both genuinely good at delivering a vacation experience and quietly aggressive in how it structures its legal terms. Those 2 things are not mutually exclusive. What changed is that several of them, in a compressed window of time, moved their contracts in directions that are less favorable to passengers. And they did it in a way that most passengers would never notice. You noticed, and that matters more than it might seem. An informed passenger is a protected passenger. When you know what your contract actually says, you make better choices about insurance, about which excursions to book, about how to pay, about what documentation to keep. You're not helpless in this situation. You just need the right information before you're on a ship in the middle of the ocean trying to figure out why your rights aren't what you thought they were. Share this with anyone you know who has a cruise coming up. Not because I want to ruin their excitement. A great cruise is still a great cruise, but because knowing this stuff before you sail is the difference between a vacation and a very expensive lesson. They deserve to know what's in the fine print. Drop a comment and let me know which of these lines you've sailed and whether you've ever run into a contract dispute. I read every single one, and this is exactly the kind of community knowledge that helps everyone make smarter decisions. If this video gave you even one thing you're going to act on, hit the like button. I'll be back soon with more of this. There's a lot more to uncover.